you said who was next, I'd say Ford behind Hyundai and Kia, and then Rivian has some nice products, but from a business perspective, they really have a lot of work to do. And then beyond that, Stellantis and Honda and Mazda are really far behind. The German OEMs are making good products, but once again, those are luxury price point. But what they really needed to maintain their advantage is to announce this unboxed assembly process, the 48-volt low voltage architecture, because that is like a monumental paradigm shift in how vehicles are built.
So we have Cory Steuben joining us today. Cory is an auto industry expert and is the president of Munro Associates. He, along with Sandy Munro, who's the founder of the company, and his team members are experts in reverse engineering and teardown benchmarking, having torn down over 100 cars, and are best able to compare the different automakers with each other. Today, we'll be asking him which automakers are set up well with compelling electric vehicle lineups. We'll get his thoughts on strategic moves Tesla is doing, specifically the new way of building their cars through what they call the Unboxed process, and his forecast on Tesla's auto gross margins. Welcome, Cory. Thank you again for joining me.
No problem. I love coming on your show.
All right, let's go. Let's get brighter. The main topic today is, what is Tesla's strategy? What is it that you like about it? What is it you don't like about it? And which other car companies are best performing and catching up? And I saw this tweet, so let's start with that. I saw this tweet that you did recently, and you said, more than a dark horse, we are nearly finished with our Ioniq 5 teardown and report. I would argue closest to Tesla is Hyundai Global. And you've got a photo here of the teardown. This is the Ioniq 5. This is the Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6. Mm-hmm. And you're saying from that, it's probably closest to Tesla. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, and it goes beyond their decisions for their electric vehicle architecture. The company as a whole makes great vehicles. Just yesterday, I talked to somebody in my run club who works at Stellantis, and I think his wife works at GM, but his cousin or daughter bought a Kia product. Hyundai and Kia share a lot of stuff. They're different companies. And it was a Sportage, and he was blown away with the features and the quality of the interior components. But then if you look at the architectures of the vehicles, they're very Toyota-esque, meaning the way they build their body structures, the material choices in the cradles and the suspension components. It's a very efficient way to build vehicles when cost is of concern and you want a balance of cost and material choices. So I look at the offerings from Hyundai and Kia, and they're ahead of where Toyota would be, because if Toyota electrified their vehicles and had an 800-volt architecture, I feel like they would be similar to what a Hyundai or a Kia offering is. So we also are recently performing our teardown, and we've seen huge improvements from the early Hyundai Kona and Kia Niro to the current generation Ioniq 5, and then the Ioniq 6 is even further improved with material choices in the thermal system lines, packaging decisions, routing decisions of some of the core components. So I would argue that they're closest because I see more refinement and more efficiency from their EV designs. Particularly the Ioniq 6, I believe, is more efficient than a Model 3 or a Model Y. The shape of it is really unique, and it's kind of polarizing, the Ioniq 6, but I really liked it. I drove it around, and people are like, "Whoa, what is that?" And I think it sticks out, but it's a functional shape. Like if I want it to look weird, I want it to be super aerodynamic. They even have front AGS, active grille shutters, that are external. They're not hidden behind, which are kind of cool and also very functional. So I love when an OEM invests in the functional aspects. Yeah, you can barely see them. So see that front, the red vehicle, the Ioniq 6, there's this little tiny rectangles underneath the lower black slit bar in the fascia. Those areas open up to allow air in for, the cooling pack, the heat exchangers for the AC or the to cool the motors or batteries. So I kinda like it. The rear looks like a little Porsche-esque, and,
Mm,
I think whether you want a more edgy, sharp design, you can go with the Ioniq 5, or a smoother jelly bean design, you can go with the Ioniq 6, but they're both really nice vehicles. And, so my opinion goes beyond just, like, what they look like or the performance metrics. People have to remember at Munro, we're literally doing the teardowns. We're
mhm.
comparing every nut, every bolt, every line, every, sourcing decision, every material choice. So, I'd like to think that our, opinions are backed by a little bit more data than a journalist.
Mhm. Absolutely. Can I show a little bit of this little clip here? This came from you.
Oh, yeah. Look at that.
So,
You're getting my
yeah.
footage from my Twitter.
I the
I
thing
like
is,
this view. This view
I do
looks
too.
good.
No, the car looks great. I'm shocked though. Am I wrong to think that this Ionic 6 is supposed to be cheaper than the Ionic 5? Am I wrong?
Wow, really? No
I
way.
don't know. I looked it up and that's what it said.
The number's bigger and it's
The
cheaper?
the
That's
Ionic 6 provides greater range and slightly cheaper, while the Ionic 5 has more cargo space and will soon offer a high performance and variant. But I don't know. It's like,
wow.
okay.
That's more compelling to me then.
Yeah. What about, yeah, it's a much nicer car, the 6. Anyways, but you're saying that, it's really well built. Is there anything else about the company and their, are they going to be able to succeed in their strategic partnerships with their battery resourcing, minerals, and so forth?
Yeah, so they've been gaining market share in the United States, I think, faster than most other OEMs.
Mm.
Like Stellantis, Chrysler, Jeep, they've been waxing and waning between that, like, 10 and 13%. GM has been falling from 50% in the 1960s or 70s down to the high teens. Ford has been in the teens, but Hyundai and Kia have been rising from essentially nothing to be on par with the likes of, I don't know, Honda, BMW, and Subaru, and I think they've even eclipsed that. And they make wildly popular vehicles, from the Santa Fe to the Palisade to the Telluride to the Kia Carnival. And once they have their electrification plans start to roll out in these other platforms, they've developed a devoted customer base that really loves the vehicles. And the biggest barrier to entry in the past was shaking the old notion that Kias and Hyundais were not high quality vehicles, but frankly, they are. They're high quality. And my wife even drives a Kia Carnival, the minivan, and we bought it because you just got way more for less money. And it had a better warranty, 100,000-mile warranty, and it was like $50,000. The equivalent, minivan from Toyota would have been in the 60s, and even, the Chrysler Pacifica would have also been 55 or 60 grand. So I paid less money, got more features. So it's really a value proposition and a quality proposition and a warranty proposition. They really fit well in the US market, and I think they'll survive perfectly fine. And there's a few steps ahead of many of the other competitors. And I feel like the level of refinement in their vehicles is further ahead of even some of the Ford products we initially saw when the Mach E came out. The initial Mach E we saw had much room for improvement, and I think we're going to start to see that improvement from Ford, but they're slightly behind the revision cadence, because Hyundai and Kia had their vehicles out many years before with the Kona and the Niro, which are more akin to what we saw from the Mach E and the Lightning, which are more amalgamations of supplied parts that are all put together, and you get an EV, out of just pure effort and brute force, without the level of refinement that we've come to expect from players like Tesla and even other startups that invest huge amounts of effort into refining the vehicles.
So, other than Hyundai, which is the next, whether it's a legacy manufacturer or one of the pure play EVs or the Chinese, which one do you think is doing a really good job and going to be a competitor?
So I want to exclude the Chinese because they haven't really penetrated the US market. And I think a lot of our viewers are probably Canada, United
Hmm.
States, and maybe Europe.
Hmm.
So if you're in Europe, you'd want to check out NIO, BYD, and XPeng. But if you're not in Europe, in the US, I'd say Hyundai and Kia are up there. They have some really good options, particularly the Kia EV9, which is coming out, three-row SUV. I think that's depending on where it's priced in, that's a better value proposition than an R1S. An R1S is overkill for a grocery getter three-row SUV because we've torn down an R1S. The suspension geometry, the all-wheel drive, the power, the performance, the frame, the body, the material choices are out of this world, but you're going to pay for it. So if you have an R1S on order, that's a three-row SUV for city driving, taking your kids to daycare or soccer, overkill for that because it can do so much more. But American consumers have routinely purchased vehicles that are overkill for what they do. So many people drive trucks around and never tow anything
Right.
and never haul wood chips or rocks in the back of their bed. So I'm not saying that that won't happen, but the Kia EV9 will be built on the similar high voltage components because we were out in Long Beach, California. I had a chance to interface with the team there. I got a quick overview of the vehicle. It's slightly lower to the ground than the R1S, which is a three-row SUV, but it's going to be a unibody. It kind of looks like a Telluride, but more futuristic with a huge amount of room and space and three rows. That'll be a great option for three-row SUV. So the I know your question was who else, but
Mhm.
I think there'll be a race for that mid to large size SUV segment once OEMs start launching vehicles because people haven't made the leap. Like GM whiffed by making this massive 9,500 pound Hummer SUV and truck, and you can't get them even if you ordered one. They're like $100,000. It just they missed the mark there. The Lyric is small. It's really like a car. I've ridden in it. We've seen them. It's not an SUV like a proper Jeep or a Ford Explorer or this Kia EV9 or an R1S. So I'm really looking for the next OEM that can launch their midsize three-row SUV because that is the most sought after market in the United States. And I've talked with a couple people. I have this hedge fund guy that I talk to who's awesome, and he's always like, "Why isn't Tesla making a three-row SUV that look like a Jeep
Mhm.
or a Ford Explorer, 3 rows, big battery? They could be charging $100,000 for it because the Model X is not that. The Model X
Mhm.
is like a bloated car, CUV. It's really not that rugged SUV." So, a long-winded answer. You said who was next? I'd say Ford.
Mm.
Um, behind Hyundai and Kia, and then Rivian has some nice products, but from a business perspective, they really have a lot of work to do to launch other vehicles to complement their high-priced Halo vehicles, the R1T and the R1S, because the R2 needs to come out and it needs to be profitable and needs to be easier to build and lower costs. So um, and then beyond that, I think Stellantis and Honda and Mazda are really far behind. The German OEMs are making good products, but once again, those are luxury price points. So it's just still to be determined.
Okay, wonderful. Great answer. Thank you for that. I saw that you just finished a marathon a couple of days ago. How
Yeah,
are you feeling?
I feel great. I put in a nice 1,000 miles of training from January 1st up until the race, 1,004 miles. So it made the 26.2 miles really easy. And just to conserve my energy, I didn't even warm up at all. I literally walked to the start line, didn't even do a jog or a stride.
Yeah.
And I fueled properly. I drank water. I drank Gatorade and ended up averaging a 6:29 pace for the whole marathon. Qualified for Boston, was 15 minutes under the cutoff time. So that was the goal. I wanted to qualify for Boston again. I ran it in
Yeah.
2013, the year of the bombing, and it kind of
Oh,
took a lot of the focus off of me running the race and put the focus on, oh my God, you survived. So
yes.
I kind of want to do Boston again. So I achieved my goal.
Wonderful. Okay, so I love the fact that you didn't even prepare. You prepared, but then at the day you didn't get started. That's fantastic.
And then if anybody out there is a marathon runner, it is incredibly difficult to run a negative split, meaning your second half is faster than your first half.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
it took me I only ran my first negative split half marathon in January when I beat Sean Mitchell down in Houston. I don't know if you remember, we had that little wager. He owes me some donuts. And, there's this race in Flint, which is 10 miles. I finally ran a negative split crim after 10 years of trying. And I think with distance running, the discipline it takes to go out easy and train correctly is very difficult. And I ran a
Yeah,
negative split by 2 minutes. So my first half was 126. My second half was 124, essentially almost on the dot. And
yeah.
a 2-minute negative split in a marathon is hard to do.
Wonderful. Well, the reason I ask you that is not only because you just did it 2 days ago, but also because it's probably a metaphor for how electric vehicles, the competition, what's happening, how Tesla is approaching it. The main topic I wanted to talk to you about today is Tesla's strategy and what is good about it, what is not great about it. And some people have said that they view Tesla as being 5 to 7 years, a generation ahead of the other electric vehicles, just simply because they started fresh and they been doing it for now 12 plus years. What is your estimate of how far ahead might Tesla be compared to, let's say, Hyundai?
So that lead was shrinking. It was slowly shrinking. When the Model 3 came out in 2000, late 17, early 18, that lead was solidly at 5 to 7 years.
Hmm.
But as the years progressed and 2020 hit, and 21, 22, 23, the Model 3 and the Model Y underwent small revisions. You added a heat pump to the Model
Mhm.
3, and all Model Ys had a heat pump. That was an improvement. You added the Giga castings to the rear of the Model Y. Then you added Giga castings to the rear and the front of the Model Y. You had the 4680 pack. So each of those innovations was then adding a little bit more bump forward in their advantage, but there were different types of advantage. They were manufacturing advantage, they were cost advantage, but they weren't these technological advantage that we really saw when we saw the super bottle and the octo valve, and also their ability to lower costs by having the batteries, the 2170s or the 4680s, so elegantly integrated into the pack with large modules. So the Model 3s and the Model Ys had 4 large modules consisting of 4,416 cells. The 4680 pack finally came out, and that had even less cells, much larger, no fasteners, another step change in advantage. So they've been they've been bumping ahead, but what they really needed to maintain their advantage is to announce this unboxed assembly process, the 48-volt low voltage architecture, because that is like a monumental paradigm shift in how vehicles are built. It attacks systematic and systematic problems and supplier based problems that shock the entire world on how vehicles are sourced, how they're developed, how they're built, how they're painted, how the factories are laid out. And that added as the lead shrunk from 5 to 7 years to maybe 2 to 3 years as other
Mm.
players launched vehicles that had similar range and similar technology and similar cost, that is gonna bump them back up to that 6 to 8 years, like,
Mm.
but we've yet to see that come to fruition. So as the Model 3 and Model Y and the updated S and X are delivered, they're making updates still from hardware 3 to hardware 4. They're eliminating the ultrasonic sensors. Some of the radar units are being eliminated. They're continually updating the software, adding more features. So that's something that a lot of other OEMs are emulating is the software updatability of the vehicle, addressing the user experience. And then the one thing that we may cover later is the charging infrastructure and charging experience. We've seen Ford and Jim Farley and Elon Musk recently announce the partnership where Ford can now utilize that. There's a tremendous amount of upside for Ford, but there is some ancillary upside for Tesla in maybe the ability to analyze the data on charging habits and road trip habits
Mhm.
of their competitors, as well as any ancillary income that'll be generated by having the chargers filled more often. Because how many times do you take a road trip where
Mm.
it says 8 are available or 16 are available? That number, the smaller that number is, the higher risk of a Tesla owner showing up and having to wait a little bit. But if you have to wait a little bit, that means the monetary clock is just ticking at each of those charge stations. So it'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall in the team that runs the charging group at Tesla, because now the prospect of having their chargers being filled more often and generating more revenue, so that it's no longer maybe a drag on the company. It can either break even or even start to generate a profit at some time in the future. So I covered a lot of things there, but hopefully that answered your question.
Oh, it does. Now, let's go do a deep dive on the unboxing process. I'm glad that you talked about how you think that it is a 6 to 8, potentially, if it does done right. So let's do a 2.5 minute process of what is a current way that they build cars. I'll pause it and then have you react to that. And then there's another 2 minutes afterwards to talk about what the unboxing process is. So
Okay.
let's watch this.
A traditional way of making a vehicle is this. You stamp it, you build a body in white, you paint it, and you do final assembly. And what's interesting is these shops are dictated by the organizational structures that exist. And they're dictated by the boundaries that exist in the factories that are laid out. If something goes wrong in final assembly, you block the whole line, and you end up with buffering in between. This is at the tail end of its manufacturing optimization. Henry Ford first invented this assembly line in 1922. It's been 100 years, and it's really hard to make a change after 100 years. And when you watch it happen, it's actually really silly to a guy like me. You take all these stamp panels, you put them together, then you put them in a framing station, you build a body that looks something like a car, you put the doors on, and then you paint them. Once you get the color, you take the doors off, and then you start putting the interior inside the car. It comes in through the openings that already exist. I wish it went in like this big piece like this, but there's actually people coming in and out of the car. There's awkward movements. Then we lift the car up, we put stuff from underneath it, we put it down, then we put the seats in the car, and finally we close it all out with glass and we bring those doors that went away for a trip and we put them back in the car. Most of the time, we're doing this with a big giant car and moving it and doing really nothing to it at all.
What's funny, though, in this kind of whole process is that just recently Toyota just called this an engineering work of art.
True.
The Model Y.
That was humbling, but at Tesla, it's not good enough. If we're going to scale the way we want to do, we have to rethink manufacturing again. As part of the master plan, we have to make another step change in cost. We started this on Model Y when we made these huge gigacastings, and we deleted hundreds of parts. We simplified assembly with the Model Y structural battery, where we decided the floor should be a part of the car. The battery is the floor. We put the seats and the interior on the battery, and we bring it up through a big open hole, and we assemble it. And this allowed us to do things in parallel, fully rethinking the process and reducing the final assembly line by about 10%. And we thought maybe we could do this other places.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the constraints become part of the solution rather than a problem.
So when you think about what I'm trying to say, I really want to hammer this home. When you have a car that's about 5 meters long, and you have people working around it like we did in Model 3, and we change that to this process where we take different parts of the car, and we can do more at the same time, like we did with the Model Y structural battery pack.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there because he started talking about the unbox process. So that the first half there was him talking about the current model. We showed that, and you know this inside out. Give us some just a commentary. What do you think about the current model that they're doing?
Yeah, so he mentioned step change. And so the current model, which he talked about, I've been in many plants all over the world. I've been to Vietnam, I've been to Canada, all over the United States. The biggest constraint is the size of the vehicle once you finish the body. So now you have this massive, he said 5 meter long vehicle. and it's also, several meters wide. Now you have to have a plant that can accommodate the size of that body and vehicle moving on conveyors through the not only the paint process, but the coating process, the drying process, the final assembly process. So your plant, the square footage of it grows because it has to accommodate this one monument, the vehicle, moving throughout. And then removing the doors and adding the doors on, that's added process and whatnot. So the idea of unboxing that, meaning separating that, you fragment the vehicle into the front module, the rear module, the sides, and then when you send those away, he was about ready to get into the fact that you have more people able to work on individual parts. So if you have 4 or 5 people on each part at any given time, now you can have 20 people working on the pieces and parts where typically you'd have 4 to 5. So now you can have more getting done in less space, because you're now adding more people per unit area of the vehicle. And they highlight this a little bit more in the unbox process. And there's a lot of challenges that they need to solve that are challenges that you don't have when you have one body. So now you have all these interfaces with these modules, these unboxed modules. They're going to have to really hone in how they align to each other so you get the rear and the front and the sides to all align. So that'll be really interesting for us to study when we eventually do get this type of vehicle,
Yeah.
because it'll be uncharted territory. And that's the most exciting part about this is that most of the differences we see, like when a gigacasting replaces 100 parts, it's still a large piece of aluminum replacing 100 stamp parts. And how they interface that piece of aluminum with the steel is still relatively common to how they interface medium or medium small aluminum shock towers into stamped steel bodies. So we weren't seeing really any sort of wild technological advance when we saw the gigacastings being integrated into these stamped steel bodies or stamped steel aluminum mixed material bodies. But this will be wildly different. And that's what's kind of the most amazing part is the impact that it will have to the total cost of the vehicle. And they highlight this is when he was just giving that little talk there, he mentioned that they need to push even further to lower the cost and ultimately pulling cost out of the manufacturing process allows the survivability of the company because EVs are very difficult to make money on, and the affordability can be passed on to the consumer. Because once again, the ultimate goal of Tesla as an organization is to accelerate the transition to sustainable energy, not just to make profit. Because if they were just doing this just to make profit, I don't think you'd have the same passion behind the development of these type of breakthrough methods and technologies.
It, like when they came up with this, I think most people were shocked because for just as layman like me, Elon was talking about that the best way to build a car when you look at the toy model is they just do a single stamp. So in fact, we all thought that this perfected Ford line production line model was so efficient and they perfected it for hundreds of years. And then the next thing to do is to do the giga castings and then to do the large stamp at the top. But in fact, what they ended up doing was completely the opposite, it seemed to me, where they're going to do Lego pieces that they're going to connect together later at the end. Do you think that this is just completely revolutionary? Is this coming to the next stage that you would have expected?
Yeah, I want to qualify what you just said there. So
Mhm.
I think there the limitations of the size of the gigacastings is not based on physics. It's kind of based on the size of the buildings and the machines. So right now, Hydra makes that 9,000 ton giga press, and it can make a casting that's almost as big as the underbody of a really tiny car. Because like the front of the Cybertruck castings, I've seen some aerial drone footage of them. They're big, but in order to make an 18,000 ton machine, it would have to be so much bigger that I don't think Tesla is willing to push the envelope to start making their own machines. So I think you have this machine limitation
Mhm.
where Tesla has pushed it beyond where any other OEM, because other OEMs use 5,000 and 6,000 ton machines to make large castings for maybe a corner of the car, like a shock tower or a lower structure in the Model S, or a shock tower and torque box structure for a Model S or X. But now when you go cross car and you have two of those together and you have a whole cross car width, now you have these big machines, 6,000 to 9,000 tons. So I know that Elon said, why don't you just die cast the whole
Mhm.
vehicle? Because in theory and physics, you could do it, you could figure it out. Um, but I don't think he wants to pioneer a whole new machine that's astronomically big. So because of that, this solution, this unboxed solution, will allow large casting in the front, a large casting in the rear, and I'm guessing not castings on the side, but most likely stamped steel assembled weldments. This has to be a low cost vehicle. They're most likely going to use steel when appropriate to pass many of the rigid requirements for roof crush, FMVSS 226, small overlap test. Really, the best material for A pillars and B pillars is ultra high strength steel, hot stamp steels. Because if you use aluminum or low grade steels, it needs to be so thick or so big, the cross sections become undesirable from a user perspective, because then it's hard to see past the A pillar. It's because it's so big. So you got to use steel because it's stronger per unit area, and or carbon fiber or other exotic materials, stainless steel, to achieve these types of rigid, you know,
Mhm.
requirements. So I believe that they'll still be using steel for the side portions, and it's just how they interface those together, how they run the wiring through, how they put the trim on. Will they have all the final trim on? Probably not. They'll probably still put all these sections together and then still go in the car and trim it out with headliner, with A pillar, B pillar, C pillar trim, other closeout panels and whatnot. So I still think there will be some final assembly steps, but it's just interesting to see. So yeah, I remember I was in the crowd for this presentation that you just showed. So I actually
Yeah.
haven't watched it on TV. I was in the room, but it's interesting to see it again.
Let's watch the final 2 minutes and see how they're going to do the unbox process.
Yep.
What you see here is us doing that on the front part of the vehicle or the rear part of the vehicle. That means we can get more people working on the car, or robots, working on it at the same time. That means we have better operator density, less time doing nothing. I call that space-time efficiency. It has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. We can have that conversation later. But we get 44% more operator density, which means more work, less time walking back to the station, 30% improvement in space-time efficiency. And because we're not building it in and out of the car with those slow movements of those robots I showed you from production hell, when we go to automate it, it's going to be a lot easier. In the end, that will probably look something like this, where we balance parallel and series manufacturing in a way where we only do things that are necessary, with a much shorter final line, blocking a lot less of the entire rest of the factory, so we can optimize material flow using the best practices. And what that means, it's going to look something like this, where we build all the sides of the cars independently, we only paint what we need to, and then we assemble the parts of the car once and only once. We put them where they need to go. The interior is attached from a bottom-up or a top-down strategy, so there's more access for those robots and people. We aren't moving heavy objects around and doing nothing to it, and it means we're doing more work on the car more of the time. And then when we take all of these tested sub-assemblies and we put them together, we finally assemble the car only one time, putting the sides on with all of their parts to a front and rear that was already assembled, carrying the floor in with the seats, and finally boxing it out with the doors one time, just like Cybertruck. So in the end, you get the same car, but it's not going to be a Model Y.
Yeah, this is not. Yeah. This is a Model Y for illustration, not the next gen vehicle.
In the end, what does that mean? To increase the scale and adoption of electric vehicles on the orders of magnitude that we just showed you, we have to make constraints part of the solution. It leads us to greater than 40% reduction in footprint, which means we can build factories faster, with less capex and more output per unit. faster, less CapEx, more output per unit dollar. Zach's going to go into more details on this later, but it also means through this innovation and some of what my other engineering colleagues are going to talk to you about in the future, we'll reduce costs as much as 50%. This is the 2-for-1 concept you hear me and Elon talking about on earnings calls.
Okay, so that's it. That's the unbox process. What was your thoughts when you saw that?
Yeah, so yeah, I've seen this already, and my main takeaway is the paint shop. So only painting what you need, and the size and shape of the components running through the paint shop are now narrower. So you have doors and hoods and liftgate, and then you have sides. So that's no longer a very tall, wide thing. It's more on a plane. So it actually changes the orientation of the robot. You only paint in one direction. You no longer need to paint both sides of everything, and you're not wasting paint, having overspray on the giga castings, and the battery that's already installed into the structural battery pack versions of the Model Y, the one we received, was not painted. The lower portion of the battery pack was painted black. It's aluminum, and the top was steel, and it was more of like a galvanized coated uh, cover, because no one ever sees it. It's covered by the carpet. So they're already not painting the battery, and they're not painting the floor. So in a normal vehicle, the floor is painted. It's not painted to a Class A surface, but there's enough overspray where it essentially looks red or blue or white or whatever color. But beyond saving the cost of that paint, they're not also doing the base coat and the undercoat and the sealing and whatnot. So there's the physical cost savings of the actual hardware itself, and then the process savings. And now your throughput is higher. And the next thing I really want to focus on, he said, more output per unit cost. So that's per unit dollar, per unit square foot. So now when you're talking about the overhead associated with the vehicle, so you have a vehicle coming out of a plant in Mexico. Now, the plant can be smaller for every vehicle that comes out, or you can make way more vehicles in the same size plant. So
Mhm.
now the overhead associated with lighting the plant, with cleaning the plant, with the water in the bathrooms, everything is now divided over more. You divide it by more vehicles. So then your overhead cost drops. And that's incredible because if you think of some of the most inefficient plants from a space perspective, they're these massive, inefficient buildings with old infrastructure, whether that's utility utilization of water, air, electricity, and they're expensive to heat, they're expensive to cool. Every time you buy a vehicle, you pay for that because it's built into the cost of the car. It's not something that's at the top of your mind because you may think it's the materials that go into the cost of the car is the biggest driving factor, which is most likely true. The manufacturing process is a much smaller portion, but the overhead associated with the plant is kind of peanut butter spread sometimes over the whole organization. If you're General Motors or VW or Toyota, you may have 20 or 30 manufacturing plants all over the world, but you have to factor that into how your business operates. And now Tesla will be able to operate more efficiently from a global perspective if they're generating more vehicles per unit square foot. And that's the biggest takeaway from that. I think it said 40%
Mhm.
improvement.
Yeah, and 50% reduction in costs. Um, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. The next thing I wanted to ask you was, you know, he talked about the fact that this is not for the Model Ys and Model 3. This is going to be the new next gen platform, which is going to be Giga Mexico, Giga Nuevo Leon. And then he also said robots, right? It's going to be both humans and robots. And I don't know if he's referring to humanoid robots, but anyways, in the investor day, they showed this slide and showed this in hidden tarp here, the 300 that these are the next vehicles that they're creating, and so this is going to be the next gen platform. Did you have any thoughts on how this might what this is? This is going to be the compact car, probably. This is up the $25,000 one. This could be look like a van. But I'm just kind of like playing around with this idea that if they do it this way, the unbox process, where they're creating different parts and putting together, it's possible that they're going to do it as a modular system.
Mhm.
And so if you want a two-person compact car, you create it like this and you plug them together. But if you want a four-person, you create different pieces, and then you put it together, and all of it becomes, 6-person and then an 8-person van and all that.
Yep.
What's Yeah, is that right? You think so?
Yep. That's a huge possibility. So depending on what side you pick, the side sections, you can have it lengthened or shortened, and then the size of the battery can change. It's a wild field of opportunity. So I believe they'll in order to truly realize the potential of this unboxed methodology, I think there'll be multiple platforms built off of this method. And you'll see the front module and the rear module will be common. I'm assuming they'll be common on multiple vehicles, whether that's their small compact car, whether they have like a little van version, or a RAV4 or Honda CRV sized SUV off of the compact platform. I think Tesla would be smart to target the most popular size vehicles globally, which is like the Corolla and the RAV4, I think, are two of the top selling vehicles in the world. The Model Y recently eclipsed them in the first quarter of this year. I believe we're going to talk about that later.
Hmm.
But they should be targeting trucks in the United States, which they are with the Cybertruck, and then the compact car, which is a Corolla, and then the compact SUV, I think globally also does really well. I think Nissan Qashqai Rogue also was a high selling vehicle globally for a couple of years, but that's the segment that if I were Tesla, I would focus on. Vans are more niche. They're not as, yeah, that's cool to have. Some people are like, yeah, I'd want that. But commercial vans, I think, would make sense if they use the platform to have a commercial van to compete with the Ford Transit lines. That would be interesting. But the profit margins aren't as high when you enter the commercial space. Um, it just gets more difficult to compete because when you're selling to large organizations that are buying 1,000 vans or 30,000 vans, if you're a UPS or a FedEx, um, they have more negotiating power and you get squeezed a lot harder. So I think sticking to consumer, the high volume consumer vehicle segments is probably the best bet for Tesla.
So this unbox process, if I carry it forward, if they do partner with traditional OEMs beyond just supercharging networks, what do you think that they would partner with? People are saying that maybe it's the batteries. It could be the whole skateboard, and then they can have the front and rear casting. But then because it's unboxed, they could let other OEMs legacy come up with have their own design, their own insignia and badge on it, and just put the top on.
Yeah,
Is that possible, or what do you think
this
might happen in
is
the future?
possible and it has happened in the past. So if you look at the NUMMI plant where Teslas
Mm.
are, that used to be Toyota Matrix and the um, Pontiac Vibe were essentially came out of the same plant. You used to be able to buy a Volkswagen a Rutan minivan came out of the same plant that made the Chrysler Town and Country. So there has been these collaborations where they're essentially rebadged, re-interiored versions of the same vehicle, and then VW is letting people use their MEB platform. I think Ford's using it in Europe for the Explorer, and even GM and the Ultium platform is collaborating with Honda to use essentially the skateboard to develop a vehicle off of. So the powertrain, battery configuration, and whatnot. So this is not uncommon, but what benefit does it serve Tesla to allow other OEMs to reap the benefits of all their hard work? And I don't see
Hmm.
the value proposition in the near future, um, because they're going to be focusing on ramping up and selling as many vehicles they can themselves. So why would they waste any of their precious
Hmm.
sourced resources, whether that's refined lithium, whether that's materials for building batteries? I don't think they're seeking volume elsewhere. Typically, that's a decision made by other OEMs when they can't achieve the volume necessary
Hmm.
to justify some sort of plant or vehicle line. Excuse me. So then they'll partner with another OEM to realize volume that they couldn't achieve themselves. So the question is, can Tesla achieve the volume needed to justify these plants and whatnot, I think they can. I think the demand will be there. So the need to partner with a GM or VW or Ford or any other OEM to sell their platform, I don't think the need will be there for that organization.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that answer. So this is this slide that they showed as their future plans, Tesla's. They've got your model, the Model S, Model X, 40 million. Then they expect the Model X, Model 3 and the Model Y to be 380. And we're already going to talk about how Model Y is the best-selling vehicle. And this is their kind of plan here. They're going to create new vehicles that's going to address massive amounts of market share here. Do you have any thoughts on their strategy? What you like about it, what you don't like about it?
Yeah. So first, these numbers are global electric fleet. This isn't the goals for Tesla to sell on
Mm,
an annual basis. I just want to
mm,
address that. Tesla's not going to sell 300 million in that segment. If they're lucky, they hit the 20 million goal that they've set out for 2030 annually. So that's the total addressable market, 300 million. So I think that's truck and SUVs, the 300 million, and then the 700 million is the compact cars. Is that your take on that,
mhm,
Herbert?
mhm,
And
mhm.
sorry, what was your question? I kind of got lost there.
Do you like the strategy that they're doing here? And what is it about their strategy you don't like?
Um, what I don't like about the strategy, let me see. I don't like that they led with a large truck and not a large SUV because I think the
Mhm,
total addressable market for a three-row SUV in the United States or a two-row SUV, I think that would have been an easier task for them to handle. And I think the delays associated with the Cybertruck's unique design has
mhm.
soured some people because I've met many Rivian owners that say, "Oh, I have a Rivian, but I'm waiting for my Cybertruck." So they've
Yeah.
let other OEMs slide in and take the initial EV buying experience away from Tesla. And I think there'd be way more Teslas in people's garages if they would have taken
Mhm,
the platform that drives the Model Y and done what Kia is doing and essentially create a larger three-row SUV with a slightly bigger battery. It can have the same motors, similar castings, different shape. That thing would sell like hotcakes if it
mhm,
were available now. I mean, because I'd get one for my wife. Maybe I'd drive one. The Model Y still is just a bit too small for me and my family. But as an interim holdover, a smaller three-row SUV from Tesla that's electric, maybe. So that's my only disagreement. But that's personal preference, I think,
mhm.
because I have a larger family, bigger than average. I think the average family household in the U.S. has 1.8 children, and I have three. So
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Okay, good. So we saw this stat came out recently that the Model Y is now the best-selling vehicle in the first quarter of 2023, and the next four are all Toyotas. So, any thoughts on this achievement by Tesla, and what you're thinking that might happen in, let's say, 3 years from now? Which of these might be replaced by either Tesla or other cars?
I think you'll see. You said 3 years from now. I
Sure.
think I'm going to go 4 years from now. Is my
Hmm.
prediction. Is
Hmm.
the low cost Tesla will finally hit its stride and pass even the Model Y, and you may
Ooh.
even see it cannibalize some of the Model Y sales. So the Model Y may peak in its sales in the next year or two at 1.2 to 1.3 million a year. But then all Model Y customers will have their Model Ys, and EVs last historically long. So you'll essentially address the core market that want Model Ys, and then Tesla will have to break into other segments to gain more market share because the Model Y numbers may stabilize or even decline. So you can look at historic numbers from Corollas or RAV4s, people who buy the RAV4s or Corollas, their buying cycle may be every 3 to 5 years, maybe every 3 to 7 years, where you buy one, you drive the car for 2 or 3 years, maybe you lease it, maybe you own it. And Toyota owners historically own their vehicles for a long time. They're very reliable. And I know many people who own them for 7 to 10 years and maintain them to 250,000 miles, and then they enter the buying pool again. So I think just like Model 3 ramped up real quickly and kind of stabilized and kind of went down, Model Y is still in a ramping phase. And I think there's still demand for the Model Y, especially with the games that Tesla's playing with the pricing, bringing the pricing down and different government incentives, whether that's Colorado, whether that's California, along with the federal subsidies. So I believe that the Model Y will stabilize and flatline and maybe decline over the course of the next 3 to 5 years.
Mhm.
But I don't think we've seen peak Model Y. And then you'll see other segments start to take off, particularly when you're talking about volume. The lower cost EVs will have to get there by volume. The business case only makes sense if you're selling even more than 1.2 million a year, because 267,000 for the first quarter is on pace for over a million a year just for the Model Y, which is really incredible.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So just the last topic here is the Ford and Tesla partnership. So, of course, this has been covered quite a bit here. So you can see that Ford and Tesla partnered, that all Ford vehicles can now take advantage of the Tesla supercharger network. And then in a couple of years from now, I think they're going to be able to, all new Fords will be built with the actual charger port so that Tesla superchargers can connect to it. And what I wanted to focus on was that actually you guys predicted this. So you guys had a chance to speak with
Yeah.
Ford 9 months ago. And let me just play that video. Uh, did you want to set it up or?
Hey, I was going to say predicted or influence, because we
Yeah.
asked the hard question here in public. So, but Doug Field intimated that they were thinking about everything. So go ahead, play it.
Love it. Love it.
That we've been getting. Actually, it's the first time I'm going to mention it, but there's a push by many of the people who already own EVs, not necessarily Teslas, but other EVs, and they're trying to get the standard moved from what we have now, the SAE standard, to the Tesla charging port. Have you guys ever entertained that or thought about it or what have you? Because I mean, the Tesla charging port is so much smaller, and it doesn't have multiple whatevers. You just, and it's ready to go. The charging ports, based on what we know, we're working with companies that make chargers. The charger for the Tesla is a lot cheaper, and it doesn't have fade. Like if you plug in over here, you get one number, doom, doom, doom. This guy over here is basically at the end of the road, and the charging goes down like a rock, which doesn't seem to happen too much with the Tesla stuff. Have you guys thought about that at all, or is that anything that's been discussed?
We think about everything.
I knew it.
But one of the biggest priorities we're focusing on right now is charging. And I think we take the responsibility for good charging experiences really heavily. I tell the team, it's not just that you gave a bad experience about Ford, you gave a bad experience about EVs, and that's a really big deal. So we have a very high gain on charging experience, and we're working really hard to figure out all the things we can do in public charging to make it better, and we'll consider everything, including that.
How about considering making your own chargers? Have you thought about that, for chargers? Getting into that
Absolutely.
business. I mean, you can sell razors, but then you can also sell razor blades, and getting a little piece of that action. I mean,
So we do home chargers already.
Yeah.
And in the commercial space, we're starting to do heavier duty equipment.
Yeah. So your company, Munro Associates, gets to interview these industry behemoths. And you guys in Munro Live, you showed this video, which I just clipped from and showed it. But tell me who's around that table. I think I saw your legs. You were there too.
No. So next to Doug Field was Jim Farley,
Mhm.
CEO of Ford Motor Company, and Linda Zhang, the chief engineer of the F-150 Lightning. And then I was sitting all the way on the other side. So Sandy, it was a long-winded way for Sandy to ask the question. He has a way of using tons of words and pauses, and he could have just said, "Hey, have you ever considered using the NACS?" That's how I would say it. We have completely different styles, but anyways, Doug Field's answer was, "We've thought about it," and he said, "Even that, essentially transitioning to the NACS." So it's not, so they were contemplating it already, even though Sandy asked him the question. So we're not like taking credit for it or anything,
Yeah.
but we were definitely pushing it and proponents of it because we saw the benefit. And I think it's a huge PR win for Ford, because now if you were considering a Mach-E or a Lightning, it's like, well, dang, I can still get one now and get this adapter and use the entire Tesla charging network and walk like a Tesla and act like a Tesla and quack like a Tesla, because it's going to interface with the vehicle so that you can plan your road trip, and it'll consider these chargers the same as it considers Electrify America and all the other ones. So I think it's a huge PR win. It's been overwhelmingly positive, and I would hate to be at another OEM in a high level management position, because now you're sitting there like, oh my God, do we have to act? What'll, if we're a fast follower and we also do it? Oh my gosh, it could be 6 months or a year of negotiation. And I think Ford is just that much further ahead to taking this huge constraint off the table that may have been inhibiting the transition to EVs by partnering with Ford on this charging network decision.
Do you expect that Ford and Tesla will have additional partnership announcements? Because now that they've done this one, next thing could be something else,
No,
slippery slope.
I wouldn't read too much into that. I think this is a very clear thing that's separate from the hardware aspect of the vehicle. It's not like a partnership where they're going to be building cars together, like the NUMMI plant with Toyota and GM. This is a very clear need, and I think it'd be interesting to understand more of the details. I don't know if they're publicly be
Mhm.
available, like how much access will Ford have to the data that's collected by Tesla? Will it be like a supplier relationship where Tesla still controls all the data and Ford just has the privilege of using it? Or will there be some cooperation with the API, and beyond the API, the data as well? So that that probably will never be publicly available, but I'd be interested to understand more of those details.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Corey. This was another fantastic episode. Appreciate you. So you guys know that this is Munro and Associates. You can check them out at leandesign.com. Check out their website. They also have a very successful YouTube channel called Munro Live. And you can follow Corey on Twitter, Cory Steuben, and at Teardown Titan. That's Sandy Munro. So thank you guys very much. And thank you again, Corey.
Thank you. Bye-bye.